Breaking news this hour, the jury has reached a verdict in the high-profile fraud trial. We are live at the courthouse awaiting the judge's decision.
A single gunshot in Minneapolis ignited over 1,000 demonstrations across the nation during a federal immigration enforcement action. An ICE operative discharged their weapon following an altercation with a motor vehicle, resulting in the death of a Minneapolis resident. The Department of Homeland Security responded by deploying 10,000 additional Border Patrol personnel to Minneapolis as demonstrations throughout the Twin Cities and nationwide intensified following the ICE-involved fatality. Federal authorities characterized it as justified self-defense, yet public fury erupted immediately. That solitary discharge didn't conclude the matter. It revealed something far more sinister. As masses flooded the boulevards, federal examiners began identifying indicators of an extensive contraband network functioning beneath the cover of civil disorder, with corruption reaching into municipal administration. This is where the authentic narrative commences. Following January 7, 2026, Minneapolis, formerly a tranquil Midwestern metropolis, descended into instability unprecedented in contemporary American history. Boulevards recognizable to locals transformed into locations of shouting masses and demonstrations that persisted through the darkness. What initiated as fury regarding a fatal encounter involving a Minneapolis woman and a federal operative rapidly escalated into a surge of severe violence throughout the metropolitan area. An ICE operative there discharged their weapon, terminating Renee Good just days prior. But presently, DHS is dispatching hundreds of additional federal operatives to Minnesota as aggressive anti-ICE demonstrations persist in escalating statewide. Within a mere 10-day period, the Department of Homeland Security declared the deployment of 10,000 Border Patrol officers and federal operatives to Minneapolis to re-establish control, a contingent exceeding the complete police departments of numerous mid-sized American metropolitan areas. Yet calculated opposition against tactical units ensued, resulting in 34 fatalities. Digital platform engagement surged by as much as 190% across networks like Twitter and YouTube. This escalation in federal deployment occurred after local guardians reported offspring missing for extended periods. Roughly 31 disappearance incidents overlooked or misplaced in the turmoil, while frantic families marched along primary thoroughfares demanding explanations. Beneath the disorder, examiners from the FBI and Immigration and Customs Enforcement detected something disturbing. The violence seemed deliberately orchestrated to mask a substantially deeper criminal enterprise. Authorities initiated suspicions that what demonstrators characterized as disorder was actually a smokescreen for a human exploitation network valued at approximately $1 billion, capitalizing on chaos to eliminate its traces. In discreet conversations among federal teams, one inquiry became unavoidable. Was the civil upheaval being manipulated by someone with genuine authority? And throughout that chaos, while chants and alarms resonated through residential areas, few beyond the intelligence apparatus comprehended the reality. The uprising might not have been the origin of the emergency whatsoever, but an ideal diversion for something considerably more hazardous. If you suspect a government official or a prominent figure is connected to these vanishings, tap like, subscribe to the channel, and comment curious to reveal the truth concealed behind everything. While the metropolis burned and the masses expanded louder with each passing hour, the genuine operation persisted in silence. Behind the disorder stood a figure nobody anticipated. Judge Hassan Duail, a 44-year-old Somali-American magistrate recognized for rigor, exactness, and 7 uninterrupted years presiding. Within judicial circles, he was viewed as systematic in the community. He was characterized as equitable. The media commended his reliability. Guardians placed confidence in him. Defendants feared his authority. That perception was not coincidental. It was disguise. Federal examiners subsequently determined that the uprisings were not a danger to his enterprise. They were the ignition point. While law enforcement resources were extended thinly and public focus remained concentrated on the boulevards, the magistrate initiated a network he had invested nearly 10 years constructing. Behind sealed chambers, examiners gradually revealed a framework that had expanded quietly for years, a nearly $1 billion human exploitation and narcotics network. At its foundation were 200 vulnerable persons, males, females, and offspring forced to the brink by poverty and hopelessness. Among them were 20 U.S. citizens intentionally recruited to manage logistics, documentation, and conveyance, establishing a domestic barrier for the enterprise. The pathway was international. From Minneapolis, individuals and narcotics were transported through intermediaries to China, India, and Myanmar, establishing a channel that conveyed not only human beings, but toxins. Confiscated financial documentation and communications disclosed the yearly transportation of more than 4.3 tons of narcotics, including heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl, into the United States. The calculated black market worth reached hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Currency was never transferred in substantial blocks. It was fragmented, distributed, and recycled through shell accounts spanning 3 continents. Minimal enough to circumvent quarterly examinations. Minimal enough to activate no warnings. No fewer than 17 authorities were recognized as complicit. Port officials approving unexamined customs documentation, financial administrators redirecting illicit currency, and intermediaries guaranteeing silence was compensated. Then arrived the detail that disturbed even experienced operatives. Beneath the magistrate's private dwelling, concealed behind strengthened concrete and deceptive barriers, examiners discovered a deliberately engineered underground passage. This was no crude channel. It was furnished with ventilation, illumination, soundproofing, and confinement zones. This was where individuals were confined. This was where narcotics were accumulated. This was where complete operations vanished from visibility. For federal examiners, the determination was inescapable. The uprisings did not arbitrarily mask this network. They masked it because someone with authority, patience, and judicial power comprehended precisely how disorder could be militarized as concealment. And by the moment the metropolis recognized what had been concealed beneath its surface, the apparatus was already operational. If you believe federal operatives can dismantle this human exploitation network, comment, destroy it. Your engagement reinforces the determination of United States federal authorities. While the metropolis still slumbered, federal commanders finalized their ultimate determination. The circumstance was no longer uncertain. What commenced as financial discrepancies and missing individual reports had led to a singular determination. This network could not be dismantled discreetly. It had to be excised at the source. They mobilized. At 4:30 a.m., as Minneapolis remained silent beneath curfew, a procession of unmarked black SUVs advanced through side boulevards with no alarms and no headlamps. Inside were more than 300 ICE and DHS tactical operatives supported by federal examiners who had monitored the enterprise for months. Every instant mattered. Intelligence cautioned that currency, documentation, and individuals could vanish within moments if even a single warning was triggered. The objective was a private dwelling blending into the residential area like any other. No banners, no indicators, no caution to adjacent residents that history was about to break open beneath their surface. When the primary entrance was breached, the silence terminated. Armed guards within the dwelling discharged weapons almost instantaneously. The firefight was concise, violent, and conclusive. Flashbangs detonated. Commands resonated through the corridors. Federal operatives, relinquish your weapons. In under 90 seconds, opposition on the upper levels collapsed. Multiple suspects were wounded. Nobody escaped. Velocity was paramount. Postponement would have signified destroyed evidence or worse. But the dwelling was never the genuine objective. Behind a strengthened barrier on the lower level, operatives discovered what intelligence had cautioned of, but could never completely prepare them for. A masked entrance. Concrete yielded. Steel hinges protested, and the framework beneath the residence was disclosed. A passage, not a crawl space, not an expanded basement, but a deliberately engineered underground corridor extending outward with illumination, ventilation, and sound elimination. As operatives progressed with weapons elevated, they stepped into a space designed to erase human existence. Inside were 200 individuals, unconscious, sedated, aligned along passage barriers and lateral chambers, hands restrained, mouths filled with fabric to prevent sound. Each individual bore a distinctly marked number inscribed directly on the skin. Inventory designations, not identities. Males, females, offspring. The youngest calculated to be under 8 years old. This was not disorder. This was systematization. As medical personnel rushed in, search teams pushed deeper. Behind a deceptive barrier, operatives revealed 1.1 tons of narcotics, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl sealed in industrial packaging arranged for rapid conveyance. The calculated black market worth exceeded $400 million. Adjacent, vacuum-sealed blocks of currency were discovered. Initial tallies surpassed $100 million within the primary hour alone. At 5:05 a.m., the operation reached its concluding phase. The magistrate was positioned inside the passage complex attempting to flee through a secondary channel while associates scrambled to gather currency and documentation. They failed. He was taken into detention without ceremony. Surrounding him, 23 cartel enforcers were forced to their knees, weapons discarded, the network framework collapsing in real time. By sunrise, everyone in the passage was alive. Exploitation pathways were terminated. Exits were sealed. What uprisings, noise, and fear had masked was exposed with exactness. The confrontation was concise, but the reality it disclosed will not diminish easily. Stay with this video if you support the federal operatives risking their existence to sever the arteries of this network at the ports. What examiners revealed after the passage was not an escape strategy. It was a distribution chain. If the underground channel beneath the dwelling was where individuals disappeared, then the maritime containers were how they were eliminated from the map. Federal analysts would subsequently characterize the container framework as the bloodstream of the complete enterprise. Efficient, silent, and nearly invisible to casual examination. The network depended on standard 40-foot shipping containers, the identical kind that transported through American ports by the tens of thousands every single day. Inside, human beings were masked behind legitimate cargo, pallets of clothing, boxed dry foods, canned goods, and shrink-wrapped consumer products. Nothing exotic, nothing suspicious. The kind of freight examiners observe hundreds of times per shift. Each container was constructed with internal deceptive barriers and floor compartments. In some instances, insulated cavities were installed to muffle sound. In others, ventilation tubes were disguised as packaging supports. Examiners documented no fewer than 27 modified containers linked to this singular network, each capable of carrying 6 to 10 individuals at a time alongside narcotics. And the narcotics were never secondary. Concealed among the cargo were vacuum-sealed packages of heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl packed in standardized kilogram blocks. Shipping manifests showed repetitive patterns, similar weights, similar destinations, similar timing. Analysts conservatively calculated that over 4.3 metric tons of narcotics were transported through these maritime pathways every year, much of it bound for distribution centers inside the United States. The magnitude was staggering. Customs documentation disclosed that the containers passed through ports tied to 3 continents using paperwork approved by compromised authorities. No fewer than 17 persons in key positions had signed off on documentation that should have activated secondary examinations. They didn't. The containers transported. The seals stayed intact. The framework looked clean. What rendered the enterprise especially hazardous was proximity. Some containers were temporarily positioned less than 5 miles from residential neighborhoods, schools, and hospitals. In one documented instance, fentanyl shipments were accumulated overnight in a warehouse directly adjacent to a family housing complex. Narcotics and individuals waited side by side, separated only by plywood and plastic wrap. Financial trails confirmed that each successful container generated millions of dollars in profit. Payments were split, delayed, and rerouted through shell companies across Asia and the Middle East before returning as consulting fees or logistics expenses. No singular transfer looked alarming. Together, they formed a river of currency. For the victims inside the containers, there was no margin for error. Travel durations stretched into days. Oxygen was rationed. Medical care was non-existent. Examiners subsequently documented instances of dehydration, respiratory distress, and chemical exposure from narcotics stored only inches away. And still, the containers transported. To federal authorities, the determination was clear. This was not contraband driven by desperation. It was industrial exploitation constructed to scale, optimized for profit, and protected by routine. The identical frameworks that transport food and clothing across the world were militarized to transport individuals and toxins. By the moment the passage was discovered, dozens of containers were already en route. Some were intercepted, others were not. And that reality weighed heavily on the teams now reconstructing the pathway because the passage had been terminated. But the sea, they knew, was substantially harder to halt. By sunrise, the raid had terminated, but the examination was only commencing. What ensued was not disorder, but methodical exposure. Federal teams did not rush to declare victories. Instead, they decelerated everything. Every documentation confiscated from the passage. Every phone recovered from the dwelling. Every financial record frozen in mid-transfer was treated as a component of a substantially larger apparatus. Examiners confirmed what many had quietly suspected. This network had not survived for years because it was clever. It had survived because the framework around it had been trained to look away. Over the subsequent 72 hours, joint task forces initiated a citywide and regional review unlike anything Minneapolis had witnessed in decades. More than 1,400 shipping records were re-examined. 9 years of customs approvals were pulled from archives. Port logs, examination waivers, and audit reports were laid side by side, disclosing patterns that had never been questioned when viewed in isolation. The results were condemning. No fewer than 17 authorities across multiple sectors were flagged for direct or indirect involvement. Some had accepted currency, others received consulting fees. A few had simply delayed paperwork at the right moment. No singular action looked criminal on its own. Together, they formed a corridor wide enough for an empire to pass through. Financial analysts revealed over $380 million in transactions routed through shell companies across 3 continents. Funds were split into increments just below reporting thresholds, timed to miss quarterly reviews by days, sometimes hours. In one instance, $27 million transported through 4 jurisdictions in less than 36 hours, emerging clean on the other side as legitimate revenue. Law enforcement scrutiny did not halt with finances. Examination schedules were audited. Patrol pathways were mapped. Examiners discovered that surveillance blind spots were not coincidental. Cameras failed where shipments passed. Patrols were reassigned during key transit windows. Internal emails showed requests marked low priority that should have activated immediate escalation. This was not negligence. It was maintenance. As subpoenas multiplied, silence began to fracture. Mid-level operatives cooperated. Port clerks produced copies. Logistics managers surrendered ledgers they had been instructed to destroy. Each statement confirmed the identical reality. Nobody at the top ever needed to give explicit orders. The framework had learned what to protect. For longtime residents, the revelations were disorienting. Individuals who had trusted institutions for decades now watched as familiar names disappeared from public directories. Offices closed without explanation. Careers terminated quietly without press conferences or apologies. The damage was not loud. It was subtractive. By the conclusion of the primary week, over 60 active cases were reopened. Past seizures were reclassified. Missed examinations were re-examined. Convictions tied to compromised processes were flagged for review. What had once been dismissed as unrelated incidents now aligned into a singular continuous timeline. Federal authorities characterized the process with one word: unraveling. Every thread pulled exposed another. And with each exposure, it became harder to deny what had allowed the network to thrive. This was not just a failure to enforce the law. It was a failure to question comfort, routine, and authority. The passage had been sealed. The containers were being monitored. Now the framework itself was under examination. And for the first time in years, the shield that had protected the network was gone. Type accountability if you believe every authority who enabled this should be prosecuted. Once the apparatus was exposed, examiners turned to the component of the case no ledger could explain: the individuals who had been consumed by it. Behind the statistics were faces that had never appeared on shipping manifests or court calendars. The 200 persons recovered from the passage were not criminals in the traditional sense. They were males and females who had arrived with minimal currency, no legal protection, and nowhere else to turn. Many had fled war, famine, or economic collapse. Others had simply been promised work, safety, or a chance to start over. What they entered instead was captivity disguised as opportunity. Federal interviews disclosed a pattern that repeated with disturbing consistency. Upon arrival, each individual was assigned a debt, often between $25,000 and $60,000, for transportation, documentation, and housing they never requested. The debt was fictional, but the consequences were genuine. Those who questioned it were reminded that their families back home could be found. Those who resisted were isolated. Leaving was never presented as an option. Among the group were 20 US citizens recruited deliberately. They were chosen not for strength, but for credibility. Some were struggling with addiction. Others were unemployed or deeply in debt. They were offered quick currency to drive vehicles, translate instructions, or store packages overnight. Most were never told the full scope of what they were supporting. By the moment they understood, they were already implicated. The youngest victims were the hardest for examiners to describe. Multiple offspring were identified as being under 10 years old. None had traveled voluntarily. Some were separated from guardians during transit. Others had been transported alone, tagged with numbers instead of names. Medical teams documented signs of prolonged sedation, dehydration, and exposure to narcotics residue. These were not side effects of neglect. They were byproducts of efficiency. The narcotics transported alongside them left their own trail of damage. Analysts linked the network's distribution pathways to sharp increases in overdoses across multiple states. In one regional cluster, emergency room data showed fentanyl-related deaths rising by over 300% in just 3 years. In another, methamphetamine admissions doubled while violent crime followed close behind. Communities did not collapse overnight. They eroded slowly, predictably, and quietly. Social workers characterized neighborhoods where addiction spread faster than any public response could keep up. Elderly residents spoke of boulevards they no longer recognized. Guardians described offspring lost not to violence, but to substances that arrived faster and cheaper than ever before. Each shipment did its work without headlines. Each delivery left a mark that could not be undone. What rendered the damage so enduring was the sense of abandonment. Many victims believed until the very end that someone in authority would intervene. A magistrate, a lawyer, a municipal official, someone. Instead, the very institutions meant to protect them had been militarized to control them. For the operatives conducting interviews, this phase of the examination carried a different weight. Firefights terminated quickly. Evidence could be catalogued. But listening to victims recount weeks spent underground, days without sunlight, or the moment they realized escape was impossible left scars no operation debrief could address. This was not collateral damage. it was the product. The framework had extracted value from desperation, then discarded what it could no longer use. The individuals who suffered most were not those who transported currency or signed documentation. They were the ones who trusted the wrong authority at the wrong moment. As federal teams compiled testimony, one determination became unavoidable. The success of the network did not depend solely on violence or deception. It depended on silence. The silence of fear, the silence of routine, and the silence of a framework that had stopped asking who was being hurt. By the moment the victims were freed, years had already been taken from them. Some would never fully recover. Others would carry the memory of numbered skin and sealed barriers for the rest of their existence. And for a metropolis just beginning to comprehend what had been concealed beneath it, the realization was devastating. The greatest harm had been done long before anyone knew where to look. When the last evidence trucks pulled away and the federal perimeter came down, Minneapolis did not celebrate. There were no speeches, no parades, no sense of relief. What settled over the metropolis instead was something heavier, a quiet reckoning. Within 48 hours of the raid, the effects were visible. Financial transfers linked to the network froze. Freight schedules collapsed. Warehouses that had operated nightly went dark. Federal analysts confirmed that more than 70% of known distribution pathways tied to the enterprise went silent almost immediately. Dealers vanished. Couriers stopped answering phones. The apparatus that had transported individuals and toxins for years had lost its protection. Hospitals detected the change first. In the 30 days following the operation, emergency departments across the metro area reported a near 40% drop in overdose admissions linked to fentanyl. Street-level seizures declined as well, not because enforcement slowed, but because the supply had been severed. For the first time in years, officers were finding fewer packages, fewer weapons, fewer desperate individuals willing to take the risk. But the quiet came with consequences. As federal warrants expanded, familiar names disappeared from offices and letterheads. Departments were placed under review. Entire units were reassigned. Dozens of past cases were reopened after examiners flagged compromised examinations and delayed filings. Some convictions were put on hold. Others were vacated entirely. The legal framework, once assumed to be stable, began re-examining its own foundation. Public trust eroded quickly. Long-time residents, many of them retirees who had lived in the same neighborhoods for decades, watched press briefings with disbelief. They recognized the buildings, the boulevards, the institutions. What they struggled to recognize was the idea that corruption had not arrived suddenly. It had been living comfortably among them. Community meetings filled quickly. Questions came faster than answers. How long had this been happening? Who knew? Who benefited? And why were the warnings missed? Authorities spoke carefully. Examiners avoided speculation. But the numbers spoke for themselves. The network had operated for nearly a decade, transporting hundreds of individuals and thousands of kilograms of narcotics while passing through frameworks designed to halt it. For municipal leadership, the damage was personal. Approval ratings fell sharply. Internal emails surfaced. Decisions once defended as pragmatic were now seen as reckless. Calls for oversight grew louder. Independent reviews were declared. Some resignations followed quietly, without statements or explanations. The emotional toll ran deeper than politics. Families who had reported missing relatives weeks earlier came forward with new urgency. Some found answers. Others did not. Social service agencies, already stretched thin, were overwhelmed by requests for counseling, housing assistance, and medical care. Elderly residents spoke openly about fear, not of crime itself, but of not knowing who could still be trusted. Federal authorities were measured in their assessment. They did not call the operation a victory. They called it a correction. What the metropolis was experiencing, they explained, was the aftershock of accountability. When a framework removes its internal shield, the collapse is not dramatic. It is systemic. Pathways close. Currency stops transporting. Influence evaporates. And the vacuum left behind forces institutions to either rebuild or be replaced. In the weeks that followed, oversight mechanisms expanded. Data sharing protocols were tightened. Joint task forces were made permanent. The quiet cooperation that had once protected the network was replaced with scrutiny that left minimal room to hide. Transparency, long treated as a burden, became a necessity. Still, nobody claimed Minneapolis was healed. Too many existences had already been disrupted. Too many years had been lost to addiction, fear, and silence. The scars remained visible in empty storefronts, in reopened files, in families waiting for news that might never come. Yet something fundamental had changed. The belief that authority, reputation, or routine could shield wrongdoing had been broken. The framework, shaken but awake, began defending itself again. And for a metropolis that had come closer than anyone realized to losing control entirely, that shift mattered. Because the network was gone, the noise had faded. What remained was responsibility, and the knowledge that ignoring it once had nearly cost everything. This is not an outlier. This is a warning. This case is not isolated. It is a pattern. What happened here is happening everywhere. According to United Nations estimates, approximately 40 million individuals worldwide are trapped in exploitation networks. The annual criminal revenue exceeds $150 billion, operating in every nation, in wealthy neighborhoods and impoverished ones, behind the barriers of residences, businesses, and institutions that look legitimate. How did it survive? Individuals looked away. Authorities accepted bribes. Employers wanted cheap labor and didn't ask questions. Frameworks designed to protect were compromised by those who valued profit over human existence. Additional networks have been identified. Examinations are expanding. The networks are adaptive, they change methods, pathways, and cover stories. The fight continues. Hit like so this narrative escapes the algorithm that buries uncomfortable realities. Comment your thoughts below, say what you genuinely think about corruption at this magnitude. Share this with someone who thinks this couldn't happen in their community. They need to witness how exploitation hides in plain sight. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The fight continues. And it needs you to speak. Every voice makes these networks harder to conceal. Justice requires witnesses. Accountability demands attention. This is not the conclusion of the narrative.